Welcome to the Parenting Coach Podcast with Crystal. Over 7 years ago, I felt like I was stuck in this cycle of yelling and reactivity in my parenting that I did not want to be in, but I didn't know how to get out of. I knew how I wanted to parent pretty much exactly, and I'd spent hours reading books, but not finding a way to show up how I wanted to. That's when I started to turn inwards. My own inward journey was what my family needed. As I changed, everything around me changed. My kids' meltdowns decreased by 90% or more with no medications or therapy. I stopped yelling, sibling fighting became almost entirely non-existent, and I found that this change flowed into other areas of my life too. My intuition increased. I started to run my life and business in a very different way. If this sounds like something you want to, I can help. Join me each week as I share my journey, including the laughter, fun, hard times, and tears. Tune in for support, guidance, and fun conversations with my favorite experts, and really anything else that interests me too. Episode 8, Shame-Free Parenting. Because I said so, you're making me mad. Why can't you be more like your sister? Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Sound familiar? I maybe didn't do a great impression, but yes. Parenting in the 80s and 90s and before was shame-based to the core, and it's still affecting us in our parenting now in ways we often can't even see. Join the shame-free parenting movement. I'm going to talk about that on the episode today. And in today's episode, what I've learned from trainings with Brené Brown on shame and guilt, what parenting looked like in the 1980s and 1990s and how shame was involved, how to feel empowered in our parenting through becoming aware of our shame and moving through it, which is called shame resiliency, how you may be unknowingly shaming your kids even when you're trying not to, shame blocking us from connection to ourselves and others, how to move through shame. It's so much more in our feelings and under the surface thoughts than in our logical, easy to access thoughts. Shame-free parenting. Okay, I'm really excited for this topic today. Somebody once commented on an episode that I was on someone else's podcast of, and she said, I screenshotted it because I loved it so much. And she said, wow, listening to her was like listening to the Brené Brown of parenting. And I was like, yes. That's what I want to be. I want to be the Brené Brown of parenting. I want you to think about how shame affects your parenting in the same way that maybe you never thought about shame before until you heard Brené Brown speak. And you were like, yep, that is true. I feel that. And I also want to add an addendum of that doesn't mean I'm an expert at shame, AKA feel no shame. I remember hearing Brené's very first video that she ever did that went viral, a TED Talk that she did years and years and years ago. And then her whole story about like feeling so much shame around it because so many people watched it and she got so many negative comments and all these things. And at the time that I was taking a training through Brené Brown, I remember thinking like, oh, she is teaching us about shame because it's something she's really good at. But I realized that people become experts in the things that they have the most experience with. And that usually means that they were not naturally good at it. Sometimes they are. Sometimes that can be true. I mean, maybe, I don't know, ask a mathematician maybe. But in my field, in mental and emotional wellness, the people that I know that are the best, my favorite mentors, the ones that help move me and really change my views and thinking are the ones that were really bad at that thing, that had a really hard time with that thing, that have so much experience with that thing. And that's essentially what I heard Brené Brown say eventually about her first kind of experience and how much shame she was feeling and how she's, shame is something she's like intrinsically had to deal with for a long time. She's very close with. And that is why it was so interesting to her. And that is why she based her research around it. So it wasn't because she was like, oh, like all the rest of y'all are like dealing with all this like human thing called shame. I'm not. So let me like bequeath all of my wisdom to you. But it was actually the very opposite that was true. And I felt that from her. And I loved when I heard her say that it was something that she really deals with and is very real for her. And I feel the same way when I talk to you about this topic. So when I talk to you about this topic, I come from a perspective of being on the same page with you, that I am right there with you, that nothing I'm going to share with you today is to add to more of your shame, to tell you that you're doing a terrible job and that it's never going to get better, but to help enlighten you in a way that has helped enlighten me and to be able to shift things for me and for my kids in ways that have been deeply moving and powerful and has really been the only path to connection for me. You've probably heard me talk a lot about connection-based parenting. I think my very first few episodes were all about radical connection and what that means and why it's important and what connection-based parenting is. And I believe all of that to be true. And I also believe just as true as that that shame is the thing that blocks us from that deep connection, from that secure attachment that we want with our kids. That shame just gets in the way. It's like the antithesis to connection. And that is why I think it's so powerful to speak about. And I hope that this message, I hope that this episode leaves you with some really tangible ways to help move through your shame, and also leaves you with some insight on how it might be keeping you stuck, and also passing down to your kids in ways that you might not even recognize it. Because absolutely, I did not recognize my shame before for all of the years I was parenting for so many years. Before I even knew that this was a thing that was affecting me. I'm going to say I was probably parenting for like 14 years before I started to gain some awareness around what was happening in my own mind, in my own brain. So that is what we are going to dig into today. And I'll mention some ways that shame shows up for us in ways that maybe we don't know. And I'm also going to talk about what parenting, shame-based parenting looked like in the 80s and 90s. I do believe it started to shift in the early 2000s. And I think that this shift came through people like Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Deborah McNamara, Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who really started researching and talking about relating to kids in a different way, in a way that was more about connection and more about attachment, where they started focusing more on kids' social and emotional wellness than on external behavior. And that change has been gradual and slow. Sometimes I get caught in this rut of thinking that like everybody already knows this and thinks this way. And understands connection and shame and how it relates to each other. But that's mostly because I just talk to myself on my podcast all day in my office, / surround myself with people online that share this similar messages. But when I go out into the real world, when I go out into the wild, I realize that it's still very ever present to focus much more on behavior than connection. And that shame is still being passed down to our kids, and in less overt ways than it was in the 80s and 90s, but definitely still being passed down. So I'm going to start with talking about what shame-based parenting is before we talk about shame-free parenting, because we have to understand something before we can understand why it's even important or what's happening there. So I'm going to give you a few examples that I came up with, and I also asked ChatGPT to check out to see what it thought about. And it gave me a few more examples that I'm going to share as well today. So thanks, shout out to ChatGPT also here. But I want to share these examples also knowing that it might be tender for you, that it might bring up some emotions of like when things are really hard when you were a kid. And if so, just, cuddle yourself up with a blanket or with a pillow, and give yourself some extra gentle, loving care. Or also just come back to this episode later if you are feeling really triggered by your childhood right now. And also for those of you that are like, nope, my childhood was great. I talk to you guys all the time. I promise. I have so many people that come in and are like, but my childhood was so great. If that's you, I'm so glad that you loved your childhood. I'm so glad that your parents were there for you and helped you feel loved and supported. But I also want you, instead of asking, how does this not relate to me? How does this not show up for me? I want you to think about, was this ever the case for me? And maybe it wasn't in your home. Maybe it was in your church. Maybe it was in your community. Maybe it was at school. I want you to think about the ways that maybe this did show up for you. And also that all of those of you that are like, but I had great parents, we're not demonizing our parents in their generation. If you read parenting books from the 80s and 90s, you wouldn't demonize them either. You'd be like, wow, this is what they were being fed. Okay. Or if you looked at what the parenting style was a generation above that, or above that, or above that. I remember reading a story about, I think it was William Shakespeare. I think it was a biography of William Shakespeare in his early life, and how difficult it was and how his teachers treated him at school and how they would get beat like so often. And I was just like, whoa, like this is to go back and back and back and back and see how just really harmful, what we would now call definitely abusive and very harmful mentally, emotionally, and physically, and unsafe. This language hasn't been around for a long time. This hasn't been done for a long time. So that is all I'll say about that. But just keep in mind, not the question, how does this not relate to me, but how can I relate this to me? Does any of this sound familiar to me? So one of the things that I noticed in parenting when I was thinking back on how people parented in the 1980s and 90s was parenting as the unwavering authority. Have any of you heard this term? Because I said so. If you questioned literally anything, because I said so, with no backup, with no more information. Why is this shaming? This is shaming because think about the message that the child is getting. The child is getting, I'm not supposed to listen to me. I'm supposed to listen to you. My ideas and opinions must not be valid. You know better than me. I don't. It's not okay for me to question because, even that I did question maybe makes me feel dumb or small in comparison to the parent. So even though it seems like such a small, little, short, simple thing, right? There's still, I always like to think about, well, what's the perspective of the child there? What is the child thinking about themselves because of how that interaction went? Another one I'll mention is comparison. So why can't you be more like your sister? Your cousin's getting straight A's. Why can't you? Your friends don't behave like this. You know better. Act your age. Oh my goodness. How many times have we heard that, or maybe heard that out of our own mouth, right? Some of these might be hitting you to be like, that still happens. Me too. Me too. So many things are still coming through me, even though I have done a lot of work consciously to get rid of all of this stuff. There's a lot of subconscious work too that I'm always doing. And we're going to talk about how to do that closer to the end of the episode. So comparison to other people, right, also tells them that they're less than. There must be something wrong with them. Why can they not behave that way? Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. That one also made me laugh because I've just heard it so much. That one's very, very common. I don't know if it's as common now. I'm not sure, but definitely so common in the 80s and 90s parenting. And why is that shaming? Because you might be like, okay, yeah, that's not kind, but like, how does shame come into play with that? Emotions. We all have emotions. We all have big emotions. If our emotions aren't being validated and spoken about and talked through and learned about, then we innately think that there's something wrong with us, that we feel those big feelings, that it's not okay that we feel those big feelings, that we shouldn't be feeling the bigness of the feelings that we're feeling. And again, maybe there is something wrong with me. I should have mentioned this at the very beginning, the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is there is something wrong in me. It is about me. It's not good enoughism that comes within me. So it's not just like, here, I did that thing wrong. Let me learn from it. We often don't do that naturally as humans, by the way. We're very much more prone to shame than guilt. Shame is not good enough. There's something within me that's not good enough. So going back to shame and emotions, if we were taught that our emotions aren't okay, right? Stuff them down, shove them down, don't feel them. And then we were like over and over and over again, given that, then there's something wrong with me. My emotions aren't okay. I must not be okay. I need to do whatever I can to not feel these emotions. Thus, we have billions of dollars of industry with, because people overeat or overdrink or smoke or drug addiction or all the things that come from us trying to numb our emotions and feel something different than what we already feel. Okay. Strict punishments. Go to your room. Sometimes maybe go to your room for the rest of the night, or making you skip dinner. You don't get dinner because you're acting that way or because you forgot your manners or whatever it was. Or having really harsh punishments too. So maybe you were a little bit late and you got grounded for like a month. Maybe some small little infraction had a really big result. Again, shaming because you're probably feeling like there's something wrong with you because there's something wrong with your behavior. Now, what I want to mention here is that we don't necessarily differentiate, especially when we're little, the difference between us and our behavior. So if we get in trouble for something, we can't notice like, oh, it's that thing that I did wrong. And that's why they're saying this. Okay, yes, that makes sense. I should not do that thing. That's not like the complex thought that we have when we're younger. And so if we're getting some like huge punishment or huge reaction from our parents that's making us feel that way, we're not noticing the difference between our behavior and us. It's all kind of interconnected. And so we're like, oh, our behavior must mean something about us. Therefore, because I got this strict punishment, it probably means something about me. It also just breaks up that connection, right? With what we want is deep connection with our parents, and what they're giving us is the opposite of that. Even, go to your room for the rest of the night. Disconnection from all of the people that you love as a form of punishment. That is so difficult for our attachment, especially when we're little. Maybe being threatened with spanking, the wooden spoon, the belts, maybe even having it followed through, maybe not just threats in your home, depending on how you were raised. Parents maybe deciding your academic career for you, like you have to go to university, or you have to study in this way, and maybe not even overtly. I've met a lot of people who became doctors, dentists, surgeons, like had some what we would call prestigious career that they felt kind of forced into, even if their parents didn't overtly say it, because it was just known, like, no, this is what you're going to do. Like, you got straight A's, like this is where you go. And it wasn't really a question. There wasn't a conversation. There wasn't a, what do you want to do? What are you interested in? Let me help support you in, what you want to do in the future. So there wasn't really your ability to question it or decide for yourself. There was also thoughts like, or maybe words like, you'll never amount to anything if you don't finish this, or you're never going to have a, significant relationship if you can't figure this out, or if you act that way, it's going to affect your future in some way, in like a really drastic way, like that nobody will ever love you kind of a thing. And even if we're not saying that, some of these messages that are coming are a lot more subconscious than they are conscious. You'll never amount to anything. Like, what does that even mean? What is the kid going to, again, thinking of the kid in that regard, in that situation, what are they going to be thinking about themselves? You have to do this or else. And that implied or else is not usually verbally told what it is, but definitely like, you don't want to do this. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're making me mad. And again, the anger and explosiveness being the responsibility of the child, I think that was 100% inherent in the 80s and 90s parenting, right? So if the parent had an explosive reaction emotionally to something, it was always pinned on the responsibility of the child, because it was the child's actions that then made them feel that way. I think you can probably see how shame creeps in here, and also how our inability to feel our own feelings as adult parents in homes where you weren't allowed to feel your feelings, or where your feelings were constantly being belittled, or where you were having everybody else's feelings pinned on you. Definitely intertwined with people pleasing there as well. I don't think that there was a huge difference between the 1980s and the 1990s parenting, like maybe a small shift, but there was still a lot of shame. Another one that I've noticed, which wasn't as present within my own childhood or my family of origin, but I've seen in a lot with clients that I've had, is body shaming. I've had clients who went to Weight Watchers like when they were 12, like when they're very, very young, taken to Weight Watchers or Food Addicts Anonymous, or I don't even know the total name of that one, that are very, very, very shame-based programs. The stories that these clients tell me, and that what we have to work through on a deep subconscious level that's rooted in them because of the experiences they had when they were younger, are so sad. They're really, really awful. And so even just taking your kids to shame-based programs, for sure that had an effect. And also saying things like, you need to lose weight. Don't eat so much or it'll show, or if you don't take care of yourself, then you're not going to look nice. If you took care of yourself a little bit better, you'd be so much prettier. Are you sure you can pull that outfit off? That shirt is for someone else, not with your body shape. Maybe you should, change your outfit because of whatever reason. Like all of these little tiny things. And it's not like they're always going to be conscious or verbal, but sometimes they are. I've talked to a lot of people who this really was what their childhood was like. Again, the comparison of like growing up, are not getting into a good college because you're not getting straight A's. There was definitely that academic rigor put on kids. And if they weren't doing well, then they were dumb, or they were stupid, or they were falling behind, or whatever. And again, not all of these were conscious, but I want you to think about, what was the child feeling? If a child who really struggled behaviorally in the classroom was constantly getting pinned out and maybe like even put in front of the class, or everybody was laughing at them, or some sort of chart, I'll mention an example in a minute, so that everybody could kind of publicly see that child was the problem child. I want you to think about what that child probably thought about themselves, and how that shame that they were feeling then led to increased negative behavior in the classroom, not decreased. And also those kids that are like pulled out because they're like, well, you're behind, or you're not figuring out reading, or let's put you in all these special programs and stuff. What did that child then think about themselves because of how we related to them? That's what I like to think about when I think about how is shame present. What is that child thinking about themselves because of how they're related to? The example of the chart I'm going to give, I heard in a parenting conference like 6 years ago. And this lady was in the classroom and she was trying to teach people to focus less on behavior and more on connection and attachment and stuff. I think it was the story from Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, but I'm not totally sure. But I remember her speaking to the teacher, and the teacher was like, there's this kid and we're really struggling with him. And he's just like, we have tried everything and nothing is helping. And she's like, hey, well, tell me what you're doing right now. And she said, well, we have these clothespins, and the clothespins are on a little line and they have everybody's name on them. And there's like kind of like a good side. I don't know exactly how she explained it, but there's like a good side and there's a bad side. And so you don't want your clothespin drug all the way over to the bad side, because that means like you're in trouble, right? You're not supposed to be on that side. I'm sure she didn't call it the good or the bad side, but that was what it was. It was bad behavior means that your clothespin gets sent over to this side, which seems kind of like a simple thing, right? But she had said something along the lines of, we have moved his clothespin over so many times that his name has worn off of the clothespin. Oh, I tear up even thinking about this story, because how do you think that little child thought of himself? How do you think the other kids in the classroom thought about himself? How did that affect his self-concept, his beliefs about himself? How do you think shame played a role in his behavior there? If everyone in the classroom was able to see that he was the kid with the bad behavior that could not figure it out, that just could not get it done. Do you remember my episode last week about breathing belief into our kids? This piggybacks on that. We are always breathing belief into our kids. Be careful what beliefs you're breathing into them, right? If you are in a classroom setting and this is a similar thing happening, like, what do you think that kid's thinking about himself? Even if we're not overtly saying the beliefs are being passed down through us. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about with shame-based parenting. I know that there's so many examples, so many. And how does this relate to us now? I found that shame is much more in the body. It presents emotionally, it presents subconsciously in ways that we don't even really notice. And so even though we might not be using those same terms, those same languages, those same shaming behaviors to our kids when we're parenting, we can still be passing that down. I will give you a personal example here. I remember sitting on the couch with my son, and I think he'd hit someone else or something. I think one of his brothers. And I was trying not to like get him in trouble. I was trying to do the connection-based parenting stuff, but really I wanted him to change his behavior. And as I sat down beside him, I was like, okay, I'm going to put my arm around him. I'm going to look at him in the eyes. I'm going to speak really calmly and slowly. I'm going to listen to him, right? All the things that you might read in some parenting book about how to connect with your kids. And it did not work. He was so mad. He was so shut down. It was like speaking to a brick wall. And then eventually he just turned around and got, huffy and walked off. And I was like, why did that not work? And it was so clear to me as I was dissecting this afterwards. This was a few years ago. But I was just getting into kind of thought work and thinking about my thoughts and relationships and whatnot. And as I was kind of writing down my thoughts in that moment, this is what my thoughts in my head sounded like. This is so ridiculous. There is no way he should act like this. This is not okay. He is a bully. This is rude. He is too old for this. That was never overtly said. In fact, I said very kind things. But my energy speaks louder than my words. If you don't take anything away from this episode besides that, my energy speaks louder than my words. In fact, I just came from a co-regulation conference where they gave this stat that was like 7, 38, 55. 7% of what we say is through words, or what people receive from what we're saying is through our words. 38% was like body language or something, and 55% was like tone and other kind of verbal cues that are not words. I explained that in a bad way, but essentially, like, our words really matter very little. Our words do matter for sure, but they're a small portion of it, right? The rest of that 38 and 55 that he was talking about, when I was listening, I was like, energy. It's our energy. It is my beliefs. It is my thoughts in that moment that's fueling my energy that then is shown all over. It's shown on my face. It's shown on my facial expressions. In fact, when I go back and I dissect, we go to some past memories and stuff for clients. A lot of the times that they feel this shame come up for them, it happens without words. It happens when someone shifts their posture. It happens in someone's face. It happens in someone's tone. Very rarely is it actually the words that are spoken. It's usually the way that it's spoken. In the same way that my husband is not a yeller and he's never been a yeller, but I always tell him, you're yelling at me. And he's like, no, I'm not. And I'm like, yes, you are. And at some point during our marriage, I realized this. I feel like you're yelling at me because of the tone that you're using, because I know what that tone means. I know what you're thinking when you say that tone, and it feels to me like a hurt. It comes to me like a hurt. Our energy matters so much. Oh, and by the way, I'm sure that I've done the same thing to my husband as well, but I'm just coming from my own perspective of this. But when we are cognizant of what is my energy, what are my thoughts, both conscious and under the surface thoughts, that is how we can still be passing down that shame without even knowing it, right? We're rushing our kids in the morning and we're like trying to get them out the door and we're really frantic and we're really frustrated and we're stressed and we're using a short tone. Or maybe we don't speak as much as we normally do. Or maybe our actions are more pushing energy. And you're like, okay, wait. How is rushing connected to shame? Well, I want you to think about this. This is how we understand how shame is impacting us. I'm going to ask you to think about situations of yours today, yesterday, this morning, tomorrow, where this has come up. And I want you to think about any time you were feeling a strong emotional activation. It can even just be that like rush, frustrated pressure. I want you to ask yourself, what is really bothering me here? Initially, it'll probably be like your kids and that they're slow. But then you're going to keep asking yourself that question, what is really bothering me here? I think I talked about this on a few podcasts ago when we talked about breaking down subconscious beliefs. So you can go listen to that one if you want more work there. But what is really bothering me here? What is really bothering me here? What is bothering me about that? And we're going to keep asking ourselves that over and over again. Another way we can ask ourselves is, what am I making this mean about me? Like if my child is slow and we miss the bus, or we show up late for class, or I show up late for work, what does that mean about me? Because absolutely, it's going to take us back to these social constructs of like what's okay and what's not okay and what's good and what's bad. And I'm going to fall on the bad side. And not just like I did something wrong, but also like I'm going to feel that wrongness within me. If it's connected to those strong and big emotions, there's usually some shame tied in there. So I want you just to think about a time when you were interacting with your kids, when you felt a big emotion, when you felt a strong emotional activation. And I want you to ask yourself those questions, maybe even 5, 6, 7 layers deep. What's really bothering me about this? And then once you get to that answer, what's bothering me about that? Then you get to that answer. What's bothering me about that? I've shared this example before with my child not listening, right? My child not listening, when I asked layers deep, got down to, I must not be a good parent. I must not be doing this right. There must be something wrong with me. Because if I was doing it right, then my child would listen every time and all of these things. I want to mention here that what comes up for you subconsciously might not make sense logically, and that's okay. We're not trying to make sense of it. We're trying to understand our emotional triggers. We're trying to understand what activates us. We're trying to understand how that all weaves back into our whole life story, starting at childhood, so that we can then change that story. One of the things I love from Brené Brown's trainings are we share our story, we write our story, we uncover our story so that we can then write a brave new ending. And I feel like I have been able to deeply write a brave new ending for myself because of the work that I've done on my shame. And if you are at the point where you're like, I still don't understand how shame is showing up for me, I would offer for you to do that exercise I just suggested. What is bothering me about this? What's coming up underneath this? What am I making this mean about me? Several layers deep until you can get to what's underneath that feels a little bit more connected to that not good enoughness. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. You will start seeing that in situations where you're talking to your partner, in situations that come up at work, in comments that people make at social media, in, when you go to your local co-op or school or whatever, and people say things and you feel activated, you will notice that connection there and you'll be able to more easily gain awareness around it. And awareness is the first step. So what's shame-free parenting? Shame-free parenting doesn't mean I'm never going to pass my shame down to my kids, because I am going to. But for me, shame-free parenting looks like this. B minus, like maybe 80% of the time, I'm able to respond in the ways that I want to. I'm able to process through what's happening within me. I'm able to calm my own self. I'm able to calm my nervous system. I'm able to notice what's happening, and I'm able to respond in ways that I feel good about, in ways that feel a little bit more connected and a little bit more calm. And then for the other 20, 30%, which sometimes feels like 100% of the time, depending on where you're at that day, I'm able to come back and repair and reconnect. And I remember Eli Harwood, she's the attachment nerd, and I work for her program, recently said on her reels that that repair and reconnection is needed for a secure attachment, that we actually have to have those breaks in attachment in order to create a secure attachment through repairing and reconnecting. And so it's necessary. It's like we need to break the glass so that we can put it back together so that it can actually get stronger in the future. So I just want you to think about that. We don't have to get to 100%. That's not our goal here. And the reason why I think that 20 to 30% of us not doing it right, still passing that shame down to our kids, is because we teach them shame resiliency. Shame resiliency is I know how to process through my shame. I know how to move through it. I know how to move on and become better for it and really take some learning from it. And for me, that looks like processing my own stuff after I haven't handled something well, and then coming back and talking to them about it, maybe repairing or reconnecting them. And I don't have to talk deeply about what came up with my shame, but I can say, like, I was feeling triggered. This is how I was feeling inside. It didn't have anything to do with you. It was me. And I'm really sorry about that. This is what I could have done. And sometimes when I get grumpy, I forget that, just like you forget it too, because I'm human. And us showing our humanity helps them be more allowing of theirs and a more understanding of themselves. So to me, that's what shame-free parenting looks like. I've shared this example before, but shame is like dirty laundry. When I'm feeling it, I throw it at everybody that I know, and then they usually catch it, and then they throw it at everybody that they know. And I can see this happen in public all the time. In fact, now that I've noticed this, I sometimes watch out for it when I'm just like, oh yeah, that's tough. Like I can see that mom was feeling triggered because she was just noticing everybody else staring at her in the grocery store as her child was having a meltdown. And so then she responded that way to her child. And then I see how then her child responds to, everyone else around them in turn, right? It just passes and passes and passes. And so we have to be the one that notices intentionally that we're holding the shame laundry, and we're going to drop it. We're going to do our own work to drop it. We're not just going to throw it around at everybody that's around us also. So much of shame-free parenting is awareness. Awareness is going to be a huge step. A step that you can take on your own, that you can figure out on your own. If you're having a hard time getting there, definitely coaching is super, super helpful. I have a shame-free parenting program I'm running right now, and we'd love to have you join us. But I will mention something about this process. Awareness is the first step. And I honestly think it's the biggest step in even recognizing that it's there and that it's impacting me still, and that it's being passed down through me, even in ways that I might not be noticing. I hope I shared some examples that kind of explain that to you well. And that you kind of can recognize that maybe it is showing up in maybe even more than one of your relationships, probably more than one of the arenas that you're in the world. And that awareness is going to be key. And the second piece that is also really difficult is doing the healing necessary. The antidote to shame is self-compassion. But also, it's like the antithesis. It's like the most difficult thing to get to when you're feeling shame. If shame is there's something wrong with me and I'm not good enough or whatever, however you want to explain it, it feels impossible to get to self-compassion, right? It feels like self-compassion is the farthest stretch, but self-compassion is what's needed to get us there. So however you can do that, I will mention a couple of ways, but I will also mention that I have thought for a long time that this work needs to be done in togetherness. When I've had people do their own shame processes on their own, sometimes they feel a little stuck. Sometimes it feels like it makes it worse. They can't really move through it very easily until we've done it together a lot of times. And then they're able to more clearly move through it on their own. But I was reading in a book called Secure Relating recently, and she was talking about how this work needs to be done in togetherness. Because if trauma or whatever difficult event happened in our past, it usually happened in aloneness. It usually happened because we were feeling alone. We were feeling separate. We were feeling disconnected. But the opposite of that is healing in and of itself. And so this can be through therapy. This can be through coaching. This can be through counseling. But I think that it needs to be something within togetherness that has an aspect of community or of togetherness so that we can do this work together. So if you are trying to do this on your own and you're like, I've been doing this forever, or I've just recognized this and this is something I need to work through, go find somebody that fits for you. I know that I'm not for everyone. If my voice, if my message resonates with you, we would love to welcome you into shame-free parenting. But if you find that that's not a good fit for you, if you're not feeling that pull to come into my program, I would love for you to find something else. Find your own therapist or counselor in your area and say, hey, I've noticed this shame thing. I want to work on it, and specifically ask about that. Specifically ask to focus on this, because I've noticed that it is at the root of all the things, really. That's why I want to talk about it so much more, because it's just at the root of all the things. So here's just a couple little tips that will get you started. If you want to try a few processes on your own, and again, if you're feeling like I'm just getting stuck with this, you can reach out and DM me on Instagram. I respond to all my own messages and I can share a couple more tips with you. But one is to allow the feeling into the body. So what this is going to look like is I'm feeling a strong feeling right now. I'm going to sit with this feeling and I'm going to describe it to myself like I've never felt this feeling before. Describe what physical sensations come up with that, right? Maybe my heart is racing. Maybe it feels red and hot. Maybe it feels bubbly. Maybe I can feel it in my stomach, like a knot in my stomach. Maybe it feels spinny in my head. And you're going to keep just sitting with that. And I want you to try and keep with it for at least 90 seconds where you're just sitting and you're just feeling and you're just allowing it. And notice how you feel after that. Notice if there's any change, any amount of relief, anything that happens as you move through that process. Usually it starts to lighten a little bit, but even if it doesn't, just notice how you feel for the rest of the day after, really just sitting with that. Another way that you can do this, which is very similar, and I think I talked about this on Subconscious Belief Work podcast recently, but you do it through a similar process where you're getting into your body and you're like, where do I feel this? And so you first decide where in the body you feel it. And then you're going to ask yourself, like, if I were to go into imagination land, like imaginary things are possible, how would I describe this feeling then? Does it feel like someone's squeezing? Does it feel like a bucket of water? Does it feel like an empty cave? Does it feel like an object or a shape, a metaphor? And again, you're going to sit with that. I want you to sit with that for 90 seconds before you move on to the next step. Just really sitting and feeling and noticing and allowing, because our brain doesn't want to allow, it wants to kind of push away. So we're just going to allow for a minute. And then we're going to ask ourselves, what does that shape need? So if it's an empty cave, what does the empty cave feel like it needs? And it doesn't need to be something that makes sense, like acceptance or love or goodness or light or whatever, like anything. What does that actual cave feel like it needs? Does it need a flashlight shined around? Does it need to be filled up with water? Does it need to be sprayed or broken apart with a hammer? You get to just do that. And as you do that, you'll often notice that while you're doing it, there'll be that energetic shift within your body. This is a way to do the work in a kind of more disassociated way, so it doesn't feel quite as connected, and it's a little bit easier for us to do on our own. So you can definitely try those two. The third that I'll mention, the last one that I'll mention today, is going to be, again, similar in that you're going to go into your body and you're kind of just notice how you're feeling and sit with that feeling for a little bit. But then this time, what you're going to do is you're going to try to go to somebody who deeply loves you. You're going to think of someone who loves you. They don't even have to be real anymore. And by real, I mean, they're still real. They don't have to be alive. They can be someone who's passed on. It can be someone who's on the other side of the world. It can literally be anyone, but someone that you feel deeply loved and connected to, someone who you love being around and who loves being around you. And I want you to think about if they were sitting there right beside you, next to you on the bed, next to you on a bench, next to you on the ground, wherever you are. I want you to think about how it would feel to have them next to you, how it would feel to have them just sit there and be with you. And maybe they say something. Maybe they say nothing. Maybe they hug you or rub your back or stroke your hair. But maybe they just sit. And you will start to feel that love, that care, that compassion soak into your whole being just from their presence. And again, you will feel that shift in energy. Anytime that we can bring awareness to shame, it starts to break apart. Anytime that we can bring self-compassion and love to shame, there is no room for the shame anymore. And this might sound simple, like, well, how is there just the 2 steps of breaking apart shame? It really is just those 2 steps, but it's one of those simple things that's yeah, that's all we need to do. But also it's really hard. It's hard to do. And so try these exercises on your own. See if you can get there. But also I would invite you to find someone that can help support you with this work. And again, we would love to have you in Shame-Free Parenting with us. And the reason why I think shame-free parenting is so supportive is because I think it's the only way that leads to true emotional intelligence and self-regulation in our kids, which means as they age, they will grow into adults that care about other people, that are kind to other people, that don't just, get in fistfights or get in metaphorical fistfights on social media with anybody that disagrees with them. Will be responsible. They'll be kind. They'll be empathetic. They'll be able to understand others and explain their needs, tell people their needs, make sure that they go to bat for their own needs, and they'll love and care for themselves. And again, they're still going to deal with shame just like we all do. That's just a human part of the whole story. But I do think it's possible to be less frequently triggered, less intensely triggered, and to really, truly feel the shame-freeness of life. I feel that way. I don't feel bogged down by my shame. I don't feel like it blocks me or keeps me stuck from doing what I want to do, because I have that shame resiliency of knowing what to do when it comes up. And that as I do that, things decrease. And if you've heard my story back in the very wee days of my podcast years ago, I used to be a yeller. I yelled all the time, definitely every day, multiple times a day. And I don't anymore. And that is, to me, the most significant impact that shame has made in my life. Without me ever having to try to stop yelling. Not once have I tried to stop yelling over the last few years that I've been dealing with shame. All I've been working on is shame. Just that, just the root. And as I started to dig into the root, I just noticed all of these other wonderful changes that happened in my life. Feeling more connected to the people around me, being more willing to have really difficult conversations, to have conversations that normally I would have avoided, to be able to say what I need when I need it, to be able to say no more. I used to hate the word no. Now I'm like, yep, I say it. I know when something's a no within me, and I know it's in a yes. I follow my own lead. I follow my own authority. I trust myself. And this is the life that I want to give my kids as well. I want to trust them. I want to believe in them. I want to love them. I want to feel connected to them so that they are raised in an environment where they naturally trust themselves and believe in themselves and love and take care of themselves. And that to me sounds like the most beautiful world. And yes, none of it is perfect. And yes, all of it is messy. And I'm okay with all of that too. I accept all of that, all of the messiness. So if you want to join us on this journey, join Shame-Free Parenting or pop on the wait list for next time. We are focusing this time on elementary aged kids. It's not for the kids, it's for the parents. But if you are a parent with a 7 to 11-ish age child, that's what our focus is going to be this round. But we will be opening up further rounds with different ages. So get on wait lists for those and wait for those to open up so that you can have that same community and connection with people that are going through it with you while you're doing it as well. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of this movement with me. And I'm passionate about speaking about shame. I'm passionate about helping us parent the future generations in a very different way that will truly change the world. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, I would love for you to help spread the word by getting this message of support and guidance out to as many people as possible. So text it to your best friend or tag me on Instagram and share it. Leave a review, rate it, subscribe it, or follow on your favorite platform. Send me a DM on IG letting me know which parts have impacted you or what you'd like to see on future episodes. We'll see you next week.